Shameless plug because I'm a bitch like that. Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And finally, I am talking about the debut album from Boards of Canada. Music Has the Right to Children. Boards of Canada. I'm kind of at a loss where to begin with these guys. They, I guess they occupy a similar spot in the music world that Aphex Twin does, in that they're kind of one of the most hyped up acts in electronic history, and they're even also on Warp Records, which is fitting. It's easy to throw the label IDM onto them, given most of their contemporaries and label mates, but to be honest, Boards of Canada just kinda occupy their own little island in electronic music. When people copy Aphex Twin, it's not always obvious because he's been copied to death, and those people could just be influenced by other people who themselves were copying RDJ. But you can't copy Boards of Canada and not have people notice. That's the nice thing about them. BOC has a ton of hype behind them, but they don't have the extreme widespread influence and copycats that RDJ does. You can't mistake Boards of Canada for anyone else unless someone's specifically trying to sound like them, which admittedly has happened before, looking at you, Tycho. But regardless, one of the most unique bands out there. But it's not just their uniqueness that fuels their hype, it's also their mystique and the fact that they seem so disconnected from the outside world. Unlike the countless projects and songs that RDJ has released over the years, BOC only have 4 albums, a handful of EPs, which themselves have some tracks in common with the albums, and some releases which are so unbelievably difficult to find that it's not worth the effort unless you're a hardcore fan. Hell, some, in my opinion, are not even worth the effort for hardcore fans. I've heard there's a single they released which is basically just an announcer reading 6 numbers and people salivate over it because only 6 copies exist. Someone paid $2,500 for that thing. And there's also a compilation called Closes Volume 1, which nobody's ever heard except their family and friends and maybe other people, but we don't know, and the obsession over this stuff just kind of blows my mind, but I digress. As for their actual music, I'll admit I'd be lying if I said Boards of Canada were a huge part of my life. They've taken several years to particularly grow on me, and I always thought the hype was a little overblown. For me, they always felt like that band that tons of people thought they were like the only ones who knew about them, unaware of the fanbase's size. And for the most part, BOC are really just mood music for me. There have been several occasions where I listen to their stuff and just get nothing out of it because I'm not in the right mood for it. Which is one of the main reasons why the gap between this review and my last discography review has been so big. I felt like if I was going to do these guys justice, I'd have to be in the correct mood and actually have them click for me. Because, I mean, they really have in the past. But then sometimes after that they would unclick and I would go back to an album and just think it was alright. I can't really think of any other band that does this, really. But I will say, even though I don't really return to this band as often as maybe some other people do, this album right here, Music Has the Right to Children, is kind of an exception. Even if I don't always enjoy it in its entirety, this is the one album from them that I return to all the time, almost like a ritual. And there's always at least something for me to enjoy on it. These guys' sound, like I said before, is certainly unique. They don't use the same tried and true synth tones and formulas made popular by Selected Ambient Works 8592 in the Artificial Intelligence series. Their synth tones are a lot dustier, more nostalgic. They're definitely trying for the kind of sound that reminds you of something you'd find on some old VHS tape rotting in the back of your school library or your grandma's attic. They're otherworldly, yes, but they're not inhuman. It's like music made by ghosts or something. There's definitely some film soundtrack vibes here too, as can be seen by the variance in song lengths, anywhere from a couple of seconds to almost 7 minutes. I of course tend to prefer the longer and more fleshed out tracks, but the short interlude tracks are all interesting and memorable. Like the synth flute sounds on the opener Wildlife Analysis, or the time stretch sample of some kid trying to write the words, "I love you." on the track The Color of the Fire. Get used to the samples of kid voices, by the way. They are all over this album. There's triangles and rhombuses, which starts out more percussion heavy like it came out of a factory, but then ending with a haunting flute melody, which I never realized until recently was part of the same song at all. We got the less than a minute's Kaini Industries, which is probably the least memorable track in the whole bunch. Play some abstract synth melodies and then some muffled lo-fi clanking at the end. Bokuma has some kind of off-putting synths that at least play a memorable melody, but just kind of seem to creepily hang in the air. But thankfully lead right into Roygbiv, which, despite being only a little over 2 minutes long, may actually be my favorite track in the whole collection, being the only track that seems to be unambiguously pleasant, despite being made of all the same creepy synth tones of the rest of the album. The melody's really nice. It's basically the only song on here that just puts a smile on my face. Heck, it might be the only Boards of Canada song to ever do that. I mean, it's not like the Avalanche's level of happy or anything, but it's like the sun coming out after the rain, and it's more like being comforting in a sea of dread. Other interludes include Olsen, which I recognize the tune anywhere, but for whatever reason I never actually noticed when it's playing. Oh, and there's the ending. One very important thought. This track has admittedly always confused me. There's this female voice sample from some kind of PSA telling people to protect their constitutional rights and fight censorship and all that. I mean, nice message and all, but this voice mentions people who might stop you from listening to Boards of Canada, and that left me wondering, who would censor Boards of Canada? I mean, sure, they're creepy sometimes, but I can't think of anything in their music that's, like, neurotic moms would find objectionable. So okay, this track didn't always work for me, but it didn't feel out of place or unmemorable either. I mean, I'm sure the actual PSA made more sense in context. I just don't really have that context. But now that we're done talking about the interludes, let's discuss the meat of the album and get into the longer songs. Typically you get tracks that have some kind of abstract but repetitive beat and some atmospheric synths with tiny little voice samples interspersed throughout. The first couple of tracks like these are all fairly similar, but having listened to this album on a regular basis for 4 years now, I can tell them apart pretty easily. An Eagle in Your Mind starts things out and sets that creepy but familiar vibe that the rest of the album has, mainly characterized by its voice samples placed every couple of beats. Telephasic Workshop is almost the same, but not quite. A bit more mechanical, and occasionally you can hear this pitched down voicing the band's name, and there's a lot of chopped up, unrecognizable British PSA voice samples in the second half of the track. Sixtyten's main asset is its creepy turntables. While not exactly the typical DJ scratches, it's some kind of other song or recording sped up and slowed down to sound all atonal. And there's something weirdly catchy about it, too. All these songs have creepy synth melodies enhancing their mood, but then we get to Turquoise, Hexagon, Sun, which places its synths at the forefront, setting a mood that's less creepy and more melancholy. Definitely a track I return to a lot. Then there's Rue the Whirl, which benefits from being right in between two of my favorite tracks on here, Roygbiv and Aquarius. Back when I was first getting into these guys, I tended to skip over this track, but now I wouldn't dare skip it. I really love that bubbly sample at the beginning, and that carries over the rest of the track and gives it a mysterious but not foreboding vibe. It's really one of the more soothing and immersive tracks on here, even though it does go off on a tangent with all these random and dissonant flutes near the end. Still a great track. I also like the addition of the bird tweeting sound effects placed in the background. And then, of course, there's Aquarius. You know, that one that's based around the sample of some guy saying, "Orange." This track immediately resonated with me, as I knew that particular sample from an old Sesame Street VHS about the alphabet. That sample was basically the entire extent of the segment that taught you the letter O. But of course, that's not the only thing that makes this track stand out. There's the warm and smooth but distant synth pads that blanket the entire track, and the almost kinda funky 70s-esque beat and bass line, and the other juxtapositions of samples, like the water splashing and the kids laughing and saying, "Yeah, that's right." And of course the switch up in the second half accompanied by the text-to-speech voice counting. Really cool and memorable track overall, one of my favorites from the get-go and still a really easy favorite now. Anyway, then we get to Pete Standing Alone. This track unsurprisingly has a lonely vibe to it, with these kind of airy synths at the beginning, and this big banging, crunching beat that surprisingly doesn't clash with the rest of the track. There's a lot of synths on here that sound like low-quality audio string sections, and as well as much more prominently on the next track, Smoke's Quantity, which has a lot clearer drum sounds than most of the others. Finally, that leaves Open the Light. And to be totally honest, this one really only started to click with me recently. For a long time, it wasn't really one of my favorites. Like, it had some of these bright and triumphant melodies heavily downplayed to the same creepy level as the rest of the tracks on here. And I thought despite its being in a major key in many parts, it was not really making me feel happy. But there's other sections that have a slightly different melody on it that's not trying to be happy as much, and it actually complements the track well. I think it's not a bad place to finish off the album. So, overall, Music Has the Right to Children is an album that occupies a weird spot in my life. It's filled with so many creepy and otherworldly sounds, but it doesn't actually feel otherworldly at all. It's more like the soundtrack to some time when you were a kid and when you went on a field trip and broke off the group and got lost. It exists in the human world, but there don't happen to be that many humans around. I may not be entirely sold on the hype for this band, and I certainly wouldn't consider them to be an all-time favorite of mine, but I do consider this particular album to be an all-time favorite. Its balance between childlike wonder and subtle dread isn't something that I've ever seen executed this well. I know a lot of people who love this album, and I'm not really breaking new ground with my opinion, but yeah, I'm with the majority on this one. Really a fantastic collection of music here. I'm overall feeling a solid 9 out of 10, but of course this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.